It is Friday, November 10th, 2023, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is Wallace Smith, and I'm here as usual with my podcast co-host, Mr. John Robinson. Mr. Robinson, post-lunch, he's sitting here. How you feeling?
Pretty content. I have my little space heater running, feeling pretty good.
Yeah, good. All right. Help all of us understand what our topic is today. What are we doing?
Yes, our topic today. So you're always aware when this event is coming up because of some of the activities in preparation, but this week was the Council of Elders. As one of our listeners referred to it, he said it's kind of like the Jedi Council. So he appreciated that we talked a little bit about it, and we thought we could talk about that again this week.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the recent council meeting. Sounds great. And thank you, Jake and Julia. It's very good to be here. And we do want to talk about the Council of Elders meeting just finished. And I do want to make sure real plain here at the beginning that, one, this is like what we've done before. I guess it might have been 6 months ago or a year ago. No, it's more than 6 months.
I want to say, you know what? Did we cover it twice? I feel like we only covered it once. It was
I think
a year
we've only
ago.
done it once. Yeah, I think that does sound right. And what it's not going to be, that was 3 days of meetings. And I am not some kind of official spokesman for the Council of Elders. But so this is not going to be a review in detail of everything we discussed. That's not necessary. Rather, we got so much feedback. Did you get? I know I got feedback, Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
Did you get feedback too?
Yep.
And even recently, I think the Feast in Canada, I heard from someone who said a younger person said they really liked it. They liked it when we talk about it because we ask everybody to pray about it. But more than that, what is it like? People say, is it it's closed door meetings. It's so very secret.
Do you put on robes?
Yeah, do you put on robes? And is there, there are candles lit around? Well, of course, none of that's the case. But so we just kind of talked about what it's like at the council meetings. How do things go? And so this is an opportunity because, hey, teens and young adults, this is your church, and Mr. Weston uses this Council of Elders. So this is just kind of a talk about that and how this last week went, as many of our friends we know are, even as we speak, up in the air in a sky, in the plane, and the sky in a plane, headed back home to various places. And so we thought it'd be fun, Mr. Robinson kind of grilling me a bit and asking me some questions and giving that. And we had very dramatic questions last time, like how many council members use a laptop. So that was...
Has it grown?
I didn't actually... I still don't even know the answer to that. I know I use one. I think Mr. Weston does, I think. I think Jonathan McNair, I think Peter Nathan. I know Peter Nathan does. He's right next to me, so both he and I got one going on.
I probably said this last time, but he was a real early adopter of tech, Mr. Nathan.
He does seem to be an early tech adopter, and he was right next to me. He has a Mac, like I've got a Mac. His Mac, I think, is older. I think he takes care of his a good long time, and he was using Logos Bible software, which he said he's had for years and years and years, just forever. But very early tech adopter. I do think you're right about that.
It was I think this was almost a full house. I think only one person was not able to make it. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was it like seeing all the fellows again?
Oh, it was so great. That is part of the fun. I say fun. It's not like we get together and like we were riding roller coasters and stuff, but it is part of the joy. That would be the mature thing to say. It is part of the joy of the council meetings is just seeing all these guys again. Mm-hmm. My very first council meeting, way back, going back now more than a decade. I can't remember the exact year. I was you're a little starstruck at first. I showed up because I was not working here in Charlotte. I would come for telecasts, but that was only every once in a while. But now I'm seeing, there's Mario Hernandez and, of course, Dr. Merith, who I did see more regularly because of the telecast.
And you sat in his seat, but go on.
I almost did sit in his seat. I think I've told that story. We'll rehash that. But it was amazing, But, over time, though, you really do come to be like brothers, you're really working together, and maybe we'll get to talk about some of that atmosphere. You're really trying to, because Mr. Weston has covered it so well, and we will highlight, for instance, Mr. Weston has a great article in 2019 in the Living Church News titled, Why a Council of Elders. It even goes into a doctrinal item that was discussed there. And so I'll do my best. In fact, I'm going to make a note now, Mr. Robinson, to add that. If I don't write it down, I'll forget to do it. So I'm going to add that article to livingyouth.org. So you can click on that. Great article by Mr. Weston. But you're there with the same desires, the same. You're wanting to serve. You're wanting to figure out what it is that Jesus Christ is trying to show us and lead His church. And everyone's attitude is the same in that sense. And it's positive and it's warm and I would say very safe, as in I really, we feel comfortable talking about our opinions and talking about our thoughts. But in particular, just on a human level, these are the guys you just don't get to see them very often.
Right.
Rob Tyler was there this time for the first time. He hasn't been able to come, especially with COVID hit in Australia and the difficulty in traveling. And so there he was right across the table from me. It was great to get to see him in the flesh.
The last time you and I saw him was in 2020. No, 2020, when he was over here for it was going to be the ministerial conference, the big general ministerial conference.
That we ended up not being able to do. That's right.
He was here, and then all of a sudden we couldn't do it, and then all of a sudden everybody was scrambling to get home, and that was the last time we saw Mr. Tyler.
That's right. You got hotels canceling reservations and people moving things, and so we had not seen him, had been able to shake his hand or give him a big old hug in ages, and yet here it was. It was wonderful to see him. In fact, we'll confess, it was our desire to have him here on the podcast, and he was going to do it, and then things were tired, and then because it was a busy week. You think it's just a bunch of meetings, but man, it's exhausting. Yeah. It really is packed. And all these guys who are here, there's other things going on, and we had editorial things going on while this is going on. They've got things in their area going on. And so we ended up saying, hey, yeah, don't worry about it. Why don't you not? And then he still ends up being on the Brother to Brother podcast with Mr. Jonathan McNair and Rod McNair. So if you want to hear that, I'm gonna probably offend everyone in Australia by trying the voice. Great Australian accent. Oh, it sounds terrible. Never mind. Let's pretend I never said that. But you want to hear that great Australian accent of his and listen to what they talk to him about, then head out there. How to find the Brother to Brother podcast. I think it's on the LCGeducation.org website. I should have verified that before I came. But regardless, head out there so we don't have him on the podcast. However, we will just assure you, he was here in the flesh, all the way from Australia, star of the most recent Behind the Work film. Right. And it was sincerely good to get
It really
to see him.
was nice to see him.
Yeah. Virtually everybody was here. Everybody was here except I think Mr. Wahovich. Mr. Wahovich is not able to be here. But he was here, through the digital connection.
Now, The council meets more than twice a year. You do it online as well in between, don't you?
Right.
And then of course during COVID there wasn't a in-person meeting for a while. Maybe talk a little bit about what the difference is, if any, between talking to everybody online versus actually getting to get together and be in the same room and have that discussion.
Yeah, sure. During COVID, because we had guys that couldn't even. A lot of flight was difficult, a lot of border crossing you couldn't do. So for some time there, we only had digital meetings. And so this is, I can't remember how many we've been able to do in person now, but it's been very nice being in person again. And it is different. Don't get me wrong, online is great, but there's, in person, it's not just during the meeting time, but it's when you're chatting during the breaks. Everybody comes in during lunch, other ministers in the building. And so we're sitting there at lunch and there's additional talk. But more than that, in terms of technically, we meet generally we try to meet twice a year in person, but then twice a year just online. And the online ones are far smaller. The in-person ones, if you're gonna have people fly in, you're gonna take some time and make sure it's worth it, and we do. So we spend 3 good full days in meetings from the beginning of the day all the way to the end of the day. And sometimes with breakout sessions like Rod McNair, Mr. McNair, we've been in sessions where he talks with all those regional directors related to French language work. And so you're packing as much as you can into all this time for 3 days. But the online ones are often just to touch base, to give a quick updates of your areas of responsibility in your regions of the world, and perhaps for Mr. Weston to maybe ask some particular questions that were on his mind, because sometimes things come up and he might want to touch base with everybody, but it's like, well, hey, I know we're going to be meeting in just a month, we'll wait till then. So the online meetings tend to be much faster. They're much briefer. But then the in-person meetings, it's 3 great days of really meeting in person there and getting to actually spend time with people, which is wonderful.
I was going to say, from the outside looking in, it's actually pretty easy to see if you're here in the office and the meetings. The meeting, you guys go into the conference room and you have the meetings. You come out, but it's like the doors open up and guys are breaking off and talking. Guys are talking in the hallway. We go up. Mr. West, Dr. Meredith used to do this as well. Mr. Weston's continued the tradition of all the other ministers that are here at headquarters are invited to lunch. So there's the when everybody goes on breaks for lunch, well, then we can go in there and some others. Jerry Reddleston, for example, some of the managers come in, and it's just everybody catching up, everybody talking about things. It really is an ideal time. So for example, I don't know that this actually happens. Say you're Rob Tyler and you've got some financial concerns and you can actually talk to Jerry Reddleston right there. But
right, you can go in the office, look at the spreadsheets together. You can meet in person and handle so much so quickly.
But you can tell, I think that kind of the canary in the coal mine a little bit, if I can use that phrase, is like Rod McNair. I mean, he sweeps in there, gets his food, eats for about 20 minutes, and then he's off to the meeting, between the meeting. And right. The time seems to me to be really well used, that it's not just the general conference, where you guys are discussing the various things, but also many, as you mentioned, breakout conversations and a chance to get a couple guys together. Like you said, there's the French work is actually a good example because you have French spoken in Canada, you have French spoken on the European continent, you have French spoken in the Caribbean, you have French spoken in a lot of areas, and so there's different overlapping guys in different areas, and it's a chance for them to get together in the same room and say, hey, what about this and that and the other?
Right. It is exactly that, and there's a dynamic nature and even a spontaneity that you just can't pull off unless you're all together, and so it is very worth the time too, right. And it's not like it's easy. A lot of these guys are very busy handling many things and keeping many plates spinning, but they know it's worth that time to try to get together. And then it not only makes the job, some things maybe easier when you get back, but also it might clear the room for other things so really love the in-person meetings.
The other thing, and I mentioned this to you yesterday after everything was over and we caught up for a little bit at the end of the day, man, I just feel it more and more every year, and I'm not just saying this because this could sound like a real cliche, and I mean it very sincerely. I really can sense and feel like the camaraderie and the brotherhood amongst the Council of Elders members.
Oh, thanks. I hope so.
Everybody seems to genuinely enjoy. We get to see everybody. We get to catch up. We get to talk about whatever, and I could only speculate. You're out there and you go back to your areas and you're out there feeling a little bit isolated, doing the best you can, and then you get to come back in. There's a whole bunch of other guys doing the same thing you are. There's a whole system behind it, trying to support you, and then and vice versa. But we couldn't do what we do at headquarters without all these guys out there doing a great job in their respective areas and pointing the congregations back to headquarters. And it's a real. What do you call that? Where something's kind of reciprocal, like a
synergistic.
Like a synergy, like a symbiotic. It's like it's a real symbiotic relationship.
Well, part of that, and since we've talked about the kind of things we hope to talk about here on the podcast, I think there's an opportunity coming up, and I'll try to take advantage of it there. But it's also you're talking to people who we're all doing the same thing. It's almost like when you get together with any kind of coworker who does a similar job, but even doesn't work at the same company as you or works in a different area of the world as you, but they're trying to accomplish the same things. You learn a lot from those. It's a shared perspective because you have the same goals, but it's also a difference of perspective because you're in different environments trying to do it. One element that I want to make sure I mention that's actually this is kind of more personal, but it's a lot of fun is all these guys got to stay somewhere, right? I mean, we're bringing them in, and so often various ones will stay with various ones of us. And in particular, like for instance, we had Mr. Adam West stay in our area, in our house from the Northeast region. And he and I go way back. He was another one we actually kind of hope to have on the podcast. And I always underestimate how full the Council of Elders meeting week is. And so he stayed at our house, and we did our best not to stay up late and talk like we used to in the old Missouri preteen camp days because we needed our energy, and we're older. However, it's just fantastic. It's wonderful to get to see some of these guys that you have built so many bonds with, and you care so much about. And I'll be upfront. I'll say I don't think Mr. West will get too big a head when I say admire. There's a lot of things I admire about him. He's friend for cause, out of experience, and one I would choose as well. And get to spend these times with guys whose counsel you appreciate, whose friendship's important to you, and to just enjoy some meals together and then you realize, see you again in 6 months or however long it is. So that's definitely an aspect I certainly appreciate.
I know you can't get into a whole lot of detail, but what are some of the things that you guys talked about in this session?
Yeah, sure. I certainly can. It's generally the best way I would kind of think of is with everything going on in the world, what would you want to talk about, right? I think all of us felt compelled to talk about what's going on in Israel,
war in the Middle
and Hamas,
East.
and boy, Mr. Weston did. And so part of what was neat about that is we could look back and see that while we haven't talked about this recently, we have talked about these things, and at a level that you aren't going to see on Fox News or CNN or other places. I would encourage actually the brethren out there. Again, we'll put a link to this LCN article at livingyouth.org. You can go out there. We will have a link to Mr. Mario Hernandez article from way back in 2014. So you're getting it's not quite 10 years ago. It's 9 years ago. It was the December 2014 Living Church News titled Amalek, Iran, and Prophecy. And it's really interesting. I gave it to Thomas White here in the editorial department, and he read it. And of course, it's out of date in some way because, current events are no longer current. Things that were current events back in 2014 are no longer current events. And on the other hand, like he said, I had to paraphrase him. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it reads so relevant today. It's just remarkably relevant and has the kind of insights you're just not going to get anyplace else. The kind of insights the Church of God uniquely provides and the Living Church of God strives to put out there in the world. So definitely what's going on right now was something that we'd want to talk about. But there was also an update on projects, all of us talking about our different regions, and just one fun thing that came up, because I know you guys out there are teens and young adults who listen, hear about it every once in a while, was the new hymn project in terms of Mr. Jonathan McNair's hardworking crew trying to having had some hymns submitted, putting them together, trying to weed through them, because we had so many submissions, and we actually had a chance to listen to some of the things that have been put together, and so an update on that was really nice. But in general, regardless of what we talk about on the council, I have to say that, and this is what I was actually hoping to be able to say, and I was kind of alluding to a while ago, is part of what's neat about that is not so much what we talk about, but how we talk about those things. And I think I've said it before, probably on the podcast, and on one hand, I'm sure I can be repetitive, but on the other hand, I think it's important to know that if we're talking about any kind of doctrinal question or prophecy, man, what happens? People open their Bibles, or if you're a laptop guy like us, if you're Peter Nathan, you're double clicking on your Logos icon, or you're me, I'm just opening up, what do I use? eSword. And you got your Bible out. Sometimes it's a physical Bible, but regardless, it's what does God say? How do we understand that? How have we long understood it? And that's exactly what I would want to happen on the council. And it's in a room full of men who think differently. Again, we'll link to Mr. Weston's article on why a council of elders, but he repeatedly says, if we all thought exactly the same, why would you need a council, right? He wouldn't even need to hear from me or Mr. McNair or Mr. Nathan or Mr. Millich or anybody else, because he knows exactly what we would say, because we all think exactly the same. When the fact is, we do not think the same. We have different experiences, different perspectives, and that's part of the plus. That's why you look for counsel. In a multitude of counselors, there's wisdom, because every counselor brings a perspective or something different. And, sometimes you enter the room with one opinion, and Mr. Weston put it this way: you enter the room with one opinion, but you leave with another one because you learned things you didn't know before. And so it's wonderful like that. But at the same time, for all those differences of perspectives, the reason it all works is because we all have the same goal. Everybody there is focused on obeying Christ's commission to spread the gospel and feed the flock as we obey God and help others to do so as well. There's not a single man in that room who does not want to do those things and follow Christ's lead in the church. And so Mr. Weston has assembled, it's a privilege to get to take part in
Right.
those kind of discussions.
Yeah, I'll
in
bet
that,
it is.
So.
So I think we are beginning to wrap up our conversation here. So as we look to finish up our podcast here, was there anything that you found was particularly inspiring, or like what was the just general tone of things, especially coming from Mr. Weston?
Oh boy. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, there were some things that really did stand out. For me, hearing news about how helpful TWPs have been. I know if like back when I was in my wonderful congregations in Ohio and Missouri and in those areas, miss you guys. For those who happen to be listening in those areas, miss you guys.
You were in them. Of course they were wonderful.
You're hilarious. Let's say that they survived me. I'll say that. They survived me. But, you host a TWP and, there's so many people, and then, maybe nobody attends or afterwards, or sometimes someone does, but do they stay? Do they last? Well, I'm grateful in our TWPs. We did see, some people who are still, but we actually had some statistics we could kind of take a look at, and it was encouraging because it's hard to gather these kind of statistics. It's not like we press everybody into filling out, hey, thanks for coming, here's 98 questions. But still trying to look at that. And I'll give a lot of credit to not just Mr. Rod McNair, but Mr. Tyler Wayne and those in church administration trying to help us understand. And as we do talk to people who come in, one guy in particular, I can't remember if it was the anecdote the regional director had, or if it was in combination with the data. But he said, you never know. There's those people you start to see every TWP you do in an area. But there was one after 4 TWPs for this one guy, and now he's here, and he's a part of, and he's baptized and everything. He said you never really know how much you're investing. Right. And what became apparent was that clearly TWPs were having a positive impact in terms of the growth of the church, in terms of people warming up and realizing, I've got to do something about this.
I won't cite specific people, but I know that others in the past who've tried really hard to figure out what's the one trigger or mechanism that made somebody come into the church. And so it's because you're trying to be like, oh, well, if they do the Bible study course, then they always come in, or whatever, all these different things. And it was so difficult to say because you really had to have, you would attribute multiple things to it. A lot of times it was never one thing. It was a combination of things. And so I could see, again, with the TWPs, individuals, you never know what clicks with them, and only God understands that. And sometimes it took, like you said, 4 TWPs. It seems to me like also, and I think this is something Mr. DeSimone has worked on a lot, we've taken these TWPs, which have been very successful for the church for a long time, but learned some things about them. And it feels like some things have been optimized. And now the last year or two, we've started seeing a lot of success, increased success with the TWPs as we understand a little more about what's effective with them and who's coming. Would you say that that's right, that we have a little more focus on how we're doing the TWPs?
I think so. Part of what we all talk about it, sometimes what is the goes on at the council meeting, same thing we're all kind of talking about, throughout the year, and can we do something better? Mm-hmm. Should we think about it? And I know I appreciate those who have been so intimately involved with the TWPs, not just say me in the field when I've certainly been trying to do some, but those who have been working with all of them in all areas, like you see in church administration, and they've been, they have this long history of them, to try to learn over time. Like, look, remember when we changed this? Mm-hmm. Well, did things get better or worse? Remember when we started doing this, was it better or worse? So that opportunity to look over time, and you're right, Mr. DeSimone, in terms of his role here, definitely, it's like he's born to learn. He's born to absorb what can we do to improve. And so there's definitely a lot of discussion like that. I would also say, in terms of what was particularly inspiring, for me was getting to hear from all the gentlemen from the different regions, and from also quite a collection of feast sites, mm-hmm. because a lot of the men end up being asked by church administration to go to feast sites, sometimes in their area, but sometimes far out of their area. So when you kind of keep all those things together, here we just met, the feast has just passed, plus we have feedback from our regions, and you start to get a picture what how's the church feeling? I mean, how are the brethren doing? And you start to get, like, if you ask me how we're doing here in Charlotte, I could certainly tell you. If you ask how we're doing in some surrounding congregations, I could tell you. But it's like an opportunity to really take the temperature of how is everybody broadly. And Mr. Weston's always clear. He says, hey, don't just get up here and say a bunch of good stuff, whatever you need to say. I mean, we want to make sure we really know. And it was just encouraging. So many men talked about encouragement of headquarters. People just saying, hey, we want everybody to know we're praying for it. We're praying for the telecast. We're praying for everyone in Charlotte. We're praying for headquarters, praying for the ministry. And just, I feel like I'm hearing it almost more than I have in a long time, that people just, and I could confirm that. I mean, I was in Canada. How many people, and if you're listening in Canada, thank you for the encouragement. How many people came up and said, oh, I just want you to know we're praying for you guys at headquarters just every day. We appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate the booklets coming out. We appreciate the sermons that you guys are putting out. And I would say that's really inspiring. But that's, while you hear those things, I heard it in Canada, we hear it locally, but to hear it from really representatives of the church from all over the world and all these regions, I just really feel like the church is happy and excited, and that was encouraging. Your
Yep.
question was about,
Yep.
was there anything particularly inspiring? That was definitely something. But you also said specifically concerning, Mr. Weston.
Well, I mean, I've been to the ministerial conferences, and and we have the online conferences as well. And
Right.
I find I do. It's like Dad's going to read us a story. When Mr. Weston gets ready for his final comments, I'm always like all attention, because it's always interesting, and it really, I feel like it gives a little insight into actually where the church is, where it's at, and kind of I don't want to go further than that, but like, Mr. Weston is the leader of the church, and God's inspiring him, and he's very in tune with the work in the church, and like what he's going to say is an interesting snapshot of where we are, I find.
Yeah, Mr. Ames is wonderful in terms of it's. He can be so consistent. I mean, you can just ask all of our teens and young adults listening. In any sermon you were to hear, who is more likely than anyone else to point to another sermon from headquarters, or a booklet headquarters produces, or magazines headquarters produces? It's always Mr. Ames. But that's not just because. It's for reason. He really believes, like when Paul pointed to the headquarters church in Jerusalem as an example and as a model, Mr. Ames understands, and he's got all the years behind him to point out is where is Christ leading the church, and pay attention to that. That's why he says, people will say, oh, I don't need to watch the telecast because it's for the world. It's not for us. And Mr. Ames will highlight, well, don't you want to know what is on Christ's mind and what Christ seems to think is important for the world to hear? And not to mention the fact that I learn things from telecasts sometimes too, even though I'm in the church. And in this particular case, same thing. Mr. Ames is very good about pointing to Mr. Weston. He's literally the person we're praying for in terms of, so much is on his shoulders. And in this particular case, like you say, it's always wonderful to hear him kind of wrap things up. And two things really stand out that were just so encouraging. And one was encouraging because I like to think we also stress this to our teen and young adult audience in the church, which he encouraged all of us to avoid getting caught up in worldly thinking. And it's kind of easy to hear that and think, oh, yeah, you're right. With all this transgender stuff going on, and with all of these, we don't want to get caught up in all that. Well, yes, of course, you don't want to get caught up in that. Don't get caught up in sexual promiscuity and the degradation of our culture. But, man, Mr. Weston is just so plain. It's like, yeah, of course not. Yeah, don't get caught up in that. But also don't be caught up in the worldly thinking that is far more tempting because it's what you're more likely to agree with. Don't get caught up in, like speaking here in the U.S., in the United States, don't get caught up in all these conservative commentators that you might think social, because, hey, they're anti-abortion and they're, don't get caught up in that. You might sympathize with certain groups for what they're saying, but the mere fact that if you sympathize with these worldly groups and organizations and their agendas, really isn't that this is me responding, just so you know. I'm not trying to represent what he said, but this is what I got my thinking. If Satan the devil were trying to say, hook me, let's say John, because I'm sure he is. He's probably I know he's trying to hook you, John. He's trying to hook all of our readers. He's looking for opportunities.
Yeah, he'd come through math somehow.
For me, yeah, probably so. But that's the point. If the devil were trying to hook me, is he going to try to hook me on, man, I bet I can get Wallace Smith to really go for this transgender agenda thing.
Right.
It's like, I think he knows there's a fat chance of that. But what would he do? He's going to pick those social causes and such out there that really do resonate with me. And he's going to try to make me start thinking more like the individuals in the world that care about those things, as opposed to someone who's focused on the gospel of the kingdom of God and the things that matter to Jesus Christ in that context. And so that admonition to make sure we do not get caught up in the world, I would, for instance, encourage for those of us who have an Instagram feed or a Facebook feed or something to ask ourselves, does my Instagram feed and Facebook feed look like, I don't know, any other Republican or Democrat or Second Amendment person or for that matter, even First Amendment person? I definitely care that I can speak freely with the gospel, but people make an idol out of that too.
Well,
or does it look like any other Protestants, like really zealous Baptists or really zealous evangelicals? Why? Why does it look like that? Well, maybe because we're thinking like they are, and that's not what God called us to.
You and I have talked about that a lot, and not to have this turn into a whole other podcast part
exactly.
two, right? But
exactly.
But I'm amazed by how many people out there who are, let's just say, in the broader Church of God sphere, so not even in living, that they have a mindset of like trying to preserve America and the American way and our rights, and return America back to being great again, and it's like. Have you read the prophecies ahead for us? God is not trying to preserve any of those things. And when Christ comes, he's literally going to replace all of them.
Yeah.
So, for us to which is easy to do. Okay. I'm sympathetic. I'm from Texas. We have a heavy Scottish background. So it's a double dose of like rugged individualism, right? And rights.
Right.
And very conservative. Grew up in the church, very conservative. Texas is very conservative, and the Bill of Rights and all our rights is a big deal and deeply ingrained into us. And I can feel myself getting pulled into that
you feel the attraction
of
it, right?
100%. And you do sometimes feel like, well, I don't know exactly how to describe my feelings. It's not like that I want to do something about it, but that I'm really bothered by.
You are
erosion.
stirred.
Yeah,
you are stirred when you hear of those things.
Yep. So I get the pull. But again, and I've said this on the podcast before, it's as Mr. Wakefield said one time, God is not looking to reform any man-made institution. He's going to replace it.
Absolutely. God, as much as I respect my country's founding fathers and the amazing things they accomplished in 1776 and the wisdom with which they tried to structure a human government and pit human nature against itself somehow, without going to the fact that that's doomed to failure, there's no way to do that perfectly. But Jesus Christ, the last thing he's thinking of is, I've really got to get America back to the point where it respects 1776.
I got to get Trump back in the office.
That's exactly not what he's thinking, unless it fits some large.
That's true. That's true.
For instance, it could be that he wants to, because Dr. Meredith put it really well once, because who knows what God is trying to work out, and this is a little. Kind of a sidestep. But I remember Mr. Trump's first election when it was coming up, and he said, well, if God lets him be elected, maybe it's because he's trying to kind of preserve some things temporarily, like religious freedom or something, or maybe because he's trying to hurry up and get World War III started, whatever it is.
It could be because he's apocalyptic in nature.
Yes, exactly right. So that's why we let go of those things and let God take care of them. You and I commented about how we heard someone not in the living church of God,
right,
but outside the living church of God, but someone who should know better,
definitely
say, well, you know what? Nothing's going to change until Donald Trump, the return of Donald Trump.
There we go. That's right.
And it's like, wow, someone who should know better, who heard the gospel preached, at least from Mr. Armstrong's days, should recognize, how dare those words come out of your mouth? Because nothing is going to truly change until the return of Jesus Christ. That's what we're here to talk about, and that's being caught up in that worldly way of thinking.
Well, because when I was reading it, my brain was already anticipating that they were going to say nothing's really going to get fixed until the return of Jesus Christ. and they did not say Jesus Christ. They said Donald Trump, and I was like,
That's right.
"Oh, really? Nothing's going to get fixed." And, and
Wow.
like we better put some boundaries on this. Okay?
Yes.
Not anti-Trump, not pro-Trump. He's just another, wealthy American, and he's involved in the political system, and he's doing what he thinks is in the best interest of America, and that's fine. It's just we are not invested in one way or the other.
Yeah, we're trying neither to pick on nor praise.
Yes.
We're just simply saying that when it comes to being a Christian and someone who has been called by Jesus Christ to focus on the things of Jesus Christ is not on the campaign trail. He is not focused on the things that most people are concerned about. He's focused on sin and not sin. He's focused on repentance. And repentance does not mean becoming more faithful to the U.S. Constitution. It means actually appealing to the Word of God and getting your life in order and looking forward to the return of Him and His bringing of the kingdom. So absolutely. So not getting caught up in worldly thinking, that definitely stood out. But also, and I hope as we do wrap up, I hope our listeners are encouraged by this. Since we are speaking here on the Living Youth podcast to teens and young adults, that very much was on his mind is making sure we make the hope of what we believe in clear to younger people. All of you, frankly, you were on his mind. Mr. Weston's, in terms of the meeting, he is so oriented in terms of thinking of the needs and cares of the younger people who attend with us, our younger members and our teens. And he was very mindful of the fact that the world is really crummy. I mean, the world is deteriorating. Things look pretty spooky out there, and there's literally things that seem to be prophetic pieces of the chessboard, that are pieces of our chess pieces being moved around on the board, and recognizing, hey, what is it like for you to be living in this particular world? And his emphasis was, man, you've got things to hope for that nobody else does, and that we need to make sure we're communicating those things to you and making sure you have that perspective. And I would dare say that we don't do so perfectly, but on the podcast, I do think we try to do that. Maybe we should do that more often, but I think you can go back. Boy, I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, but we actually did, I think, an episode that was very much, did we have a question from someone and talk about such things?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly how it was phrased, but us trying to contextualize the end time and what it should mean for you when you're young and what happens after.
Yeah, normally for those who happen to follow the podcast on YouTube, which you can go to the Living Youth channel on YouTube, and you can you watch them, but you're not going to see anything more than a vibrating kind of waveform. However, at the end of that, like you see with most YouTube videos, we put links up, and there's always a link to the Living Youth Programs channel, so you can subscribe, and we hope that you will subscribe. If you haven't, please do. And please, I should do like it on the telecast, click that bell if you want to be notified when something new comes out on the channel. So there's the Living Youth Programs channel. But also, there's a link to maybe the previous, usually I think I put the previous podcasts. Like if you didn't hear the last one, you just click on that and it shows as a thumbnail on the screen. But I think this time, just knowing that in mind, I think I'll instead, Mr. Robbins, in fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already know whether I did this or not, or at the end, so we'll know if I succeeded or failed. I'll try to instead put the thumbnail for the one where we talked about those things, about why, if you're young, what hope is there for you for the future? Well, because we did kind of address that. And I've also talked about having Mr. Weston on the podcast to talk about such things. And I think we just need to redouble our effort to
I found
do
the notes, but not which podcast it is.
I'll find it. Okay. In fact, you know what? I bet I can find it super fast because
it's going to be somewhere around episode
skills.
14 or 15 of season 2.
Of season 2, let's see.
You guys just hang out there while
we're going to, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do, Mr. Robinson.
Okay.
I'm going to go to livingyouth.org. And at livingyouth.org, it's almost like we just set this up. I can actually click on if you're on a mobile, you can click on the hamburger icon in the top right. If you're on a desktop, you can click in the menu at the top right. And I'm going to click on podcast. And there I see a list of every single podcast you and I have ever done. And on this one,
we have a youth website.
You're hilarious, Mr. Robinson. We go down. Here's Talking Camp with Mr. Gerald Weston. That was pretty cool. The Lure of the Influencer Life, which was a very popular one. Let's see. Is God a socialist or a capitalist? Okay, I said I could find it really fast, and now I'm having a hard time. Let's see. The Poisonous Power of Blame. That one I think actually was pretty Well, now it's like a stroll down memory lane. We've really gone off the top. Oh, here it is. It's it. Episode 46. Is that the one you said a while ago, Mr. Robinson?
Well, see, you've numbered them.
I have. For those who know the secret behind the scenes thing, there's a tension between, do you number them from one going forward, or do you restart the numbering with each season? In fact, if you look very carefully at the numbers on YouTube for the last two, you'll see I kind of messed it up. I forgot to start over for the season, the number I put in parentheses. But no, if you're starting from one, it's episode 46, 46, and the title is How Can I Have Hope for My Future? But if you're not just counting by that, then it would be episode 16. You're right, episode 16 of season 2. So anyway, that's out there. So I'll do my best at the end of the YouTube video to make that the thumbnail instead of the previous podcast, just to give people a quick link. And I think that's it. Anything else, Mr. Robinson, that you want to?
I think that covers it.
Think that covers it? All right. Well, for those of you who have regional directors or pastors on their way back to your home areas, which their plane probably would have left this morning as we're recording this. Of course, you'll be listening to this possibly tonight, but I hope you'll pray for their safe travels. Several of them are going to international areas. And let me just say, it was a pleasure. The meetings went just wonderfully and smoothly, and it's just such a privilege to get to hang out with people I admire and respect so much. So thank you, Mr. Robinson, for being willing to grow me a little bit.
It's always good to get the overview.
Smith and Robinson.